Thanks for tuning in to the Oxygen Alliance YouTube channel, where we share the Concentrator Talk virtual meeting hosted every Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. Central African Time. In the talk, we discuss different aspects of oxygen concentrator assessment, use, and maintenance. And please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notifications bell.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for week 26 of the Concentrator Talk, brought to you by the Auction Alliance. My name is Amarpreet Rai, and I am currently in New York. As you can see, I'm taking over the hosting duties for this week as Maui is away with his brother getting married. So congratulations to him and his entire family. I am joined today with our usual technicians from Open02 and Sanrai. On the technicians panel today, we have Kulwinder Singh, Aubrey Chikunda, Cynthia Chikomoni, Sharon Ngozo, and Mtedo Sinjani. For those that may not be aware, the Concentrator Talk is a virtual meeting that the Auction Alliance hosts every Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. Central African Time to discuss different aspects of concentrator assessment, use, and maintenance. If you have any problems regarding auction concentrator maintenance that you need help with, we always encourage you to send the questions to us in advance through our email, info@auctionalliance.org, and our technicians will do their best to help you with the right solutions. If you have any questions for us during the call, you can paste them into the chat, or you can raise your hand and ask the question. During the call, we'll also have a topic of interest as usual, and today we will be discussing about different tools used when repairing an auction concentrator. And now, to jump to our first questions. While working on the DeVilbiss 525 auction concentrator, I observed that the compressor heated up and the oxygen purity was low. Are these two observations connected? If they are, how does the compressor heat affect the purity of the oxygen? Kulwinder, if you could please answer that question for us.
Thank you, Amrit. In the oxygen concentrator, to separate the gases found in the air, oxygen concentrators use pressure swing adsorption technology. The ambient air contains 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% of other gases. So removing nitrogen from the room air therefore leaves you with the air that is largely made up of oxygen. And this is basically what oxygen concentrators do. Under high pressure, the molecule sieve or the zeolite grabs the nitrogen and lets the remaining air, that is normally predominantly oxygen, to go through. The molecular zeolite used in oxygen concentrators is affected by several environmental factors that directly affect its performance. So these factors are dust, temperature, and humidity. So if the molecular zeolite is used in the conditions that exceed the temperature recommendations, it performs poorly. So when the compressor heats up, it pushes heated air into the seabed. This in turn heats up the zeolite, which reduces its oxygen adsorption performance. So due to which the purity is reduced. To avoid this problem, ensure that the concentrator is used in the conditions that meet the environmental recommendations stated in the service manual. Also check if all cooling fans are working properly to prevent the compressor from overheating. So every oxygen concentrator is marked with this performance temperature. No? So normally it is nearly 40 degrees Celsius. So it should be maintained. Thank you.
Thank you, Kulwinder. Do we have any questions or other comments? Okay. I know we do have a smaller group today, so please don't hesitate to speak up if you want to add something. If not, we will move to our next question. What pressure is necessary in an oxygen concentrator to separate oxygen from nitrogen? Cynthia, if you could help us with this question.
Thank you, Amapri. As was previously discussed in question 1, high pressure is necessary for separation of oxygen, nitrogen, and other gases in the air. The oxygen concentrator compressor draws in outside air and compresses it to increase the pressure. The purity of oxygen from the oxygen concentrator is influenced by the pressure in such a way that when pressure is high, purity is also high, and when pressure is low, purity is also low. Specific recommended pressure levels are used in oxygen concentrators to produce oxygen with high purity. So the purity is used, the pressure used to separate the gases typically ranges from 5 to 10 bars, which is 72.5 to 145 psi. Though in some circumstances, when the high pressures are also higher pressures ranges may also be used depending on the output capacity. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Cynthia. Does anyone have any questions or anything that they want to add? I think pressure is a very essential part of how oxygen concentrators work. So it's an interesting concept that it was great to learn more about from you, Cynthia. Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, then we'll move to our next question. I work as a technician at a certain district hospital, and I noticed a sound coming from the compressor that sounded like some air was escaping due to high pressure. When I asked my fellow technicians what it was, one of them said it was a relief valve. What is a relief valve, and what is the purpose of having one on an oxygen concentrator compressor? Aubrey, if you can please answer that question.
Thank you. So the picture that's shown in the presentation shows the pressure relief valve on a compressor. A relief valve, often known as a pressure relief valve, is a type of safety valve used to regulate or limit the system's pressure. The relief valve is designed to open at a specified set pressure to protect the compressor from exceeding its normal operating ranges. When the pressure builds up and exceeds the intended pressure, the pressure relief valve opens and lets some air out. When this is happening, often it disrupts the pressure swing adsorption process and can lower the oxygen purity at the patient outlet. This is because the two zeolite sieve beds will be receiving less pressure than necessary to separate the nitrogen and oxygen from ambient air. The relief valve is therefore a backup passage of pressurized air out of the system, which is used when the pressure in the compressor exceeds the operational safety limits. The purpose of having a relief valve on a compressor is that when the set pressure is exceeded, the relief valve becomes the path of least resistance, as the valve is forced open and a portion of the air is diverted through the backup route. It is recommended that the outlet of the relief valve is in the open air. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aubrey, for your answer there. It sounds like a lot of our first questions have all dealt with pressure. Does anyone have any other questions or comments that they'd like to add? Okay, then we will move to our next question. Our question is, hello, I am a biomedical technician at a certain clinic in Malawi. I was conducting preventative maintenance on an AirSep Elite oxygen concentrator. This concentrator was producing a purity of 89%. but its sieve beds had been refilled with new zeolite the previous week, and the compressor was serviced too. I removed the covers to check for leakages and found that there was a leakage on the tube that is connected to the input of the product tank. I was removing the tubing from the tip of the tank when the tubing was broken. Unfortunately, we do not have spare product tanks of this type in the workshop. Can I replace the product tank with one from another concentrator model? Let's say the DeVilbiss 525 concentrator product tank. Mteto, would you please answer this question?
Thank you, Amapri. So the quick answer to this question is that you cannot replace the product tank with another tank unless you want to replace with the one that is also coming from an air-safe airlight concentrator. So there are a number of reasons why you cannot replace a tank from another model of an oxygen concentrator. And these include that product tanks from different concentrators differ in their sizes. So you can literally see in the graphics there. So for instance, the product tank in a DeVilbiss 525 is actually bigger than one that is from an air-safe airlight. Also, the pressures in these different product tanks also differ. So therefore, replacing the tank with the one from a DeVilbiss, which is large in size, will result in decrease of the output pressure of the concentrator, which may actually affect the oxygen purity of that particular air-safe concentrator. So apart from this, every concentrator was designed in different way to accommodate the parts that come with the concentrator model. Thus, there will be no enough space if you try and fit in a different product tank in an airlight oxygen concentrator. So another reason is that the product tank in an air-safe airlight contains some amount of zeolite, which helps to further purify the oxygen coming from the seedbed. And the zeolite also helps in stabilizing the oxygen in the product tank. Therefore, I would recommend that you would need to actually maybe use epoxy because it was broken, join the broken tip to the product tank. You should ensure that there is no leakages when you put the product tank back into the oxygen concentrator. So you need to actually let the epoxy dry, and then you are able to use the oxygen concentrator. Thank you, Amapri.
Thank you very much, Mteto. Do we have any questions or additional comments on accumulator product tanks? Okay, then we have come to our first poll. So our first poll, I'm going to launch that right now. The poll is, have you ever encountered a problem with a product tank of any concentrator model? And just as a reminder, in order to access the polls, there is the little activity button at the bottom with the triangle, square, and circle. And if you click that, the poll will pop up. This should be true whether if you're on your mobile phone or on a laptop. You just need to look for that button, or the poll hopefully popped up on your screen for you. And it looks like we have actually most answers in, and the majority of our answers are no. So it seems like the product tank is not a common failure that people see. So hopefully our technician that was trying to repair this can use some epoxy and get his machine back working again. So thank you everyone for the poll, and thank you Mteto for those answers. Our next question here. I am working on a DeVilbiss 525 oxygen concentrator. I have serviced the compressor and refilled zeolite as a part of the service, but there is little improvement in oxygen purity. I assumed it was the circuit board, sieve beds, and compressor that are misbehaving. I exchanged with the best performing ones and no improvement was observed. Apart from worn out compressor kits, degraded zeolite, low power voltage, higher temperatures, what other factors can affect oxygen purity? Tato, back to you to answer this question, please.
Thank you, Amapri. So surely the common problems that affect oxygen purity are the ones you have actually dealt with. So as for this situation, much time is required in the troubleshooting process in order to repair this oxygen concentrator. So an important factor to consider is a broken one-way valve. So you can see in the graphics there on the left side, we have like two one-way valves. So if either of the pointed one-way valves is broken, never expect the oxygen purity to improve. When one of the valves is broken, pressure builds up and supply from one seabed is actually affected. So instead of the left or the right bed pressure taking the normal middle pipe way to the product tank, a certain amount of pressure escapes to the other side since the valve is broken. So when we say the valve is broken, we mean that it is allowing air to flow in both directions. So as the name itself defines, the one-way valve. So you can also see on the right side there, the pointed part provides a mechanism allowing air to flow in one direction only. So if this is damaged, there's a likelihood that you need to actually replace the whole one-way valve in order to have everything operational again. Thank you, Amapri.
Thank you, Tato. That was a very interesting explanation. And I think a good reminder to us all that it's not always the key components that we expect that can break in a concentrator. So we now have our next poll question. And while I am loading that, do we have any other questions or comments from the audience?
Yeah, so just another like additional comment from what I've just explained. So we have actually experienced this problem here. So we had technicians who were working on the DeVobis 525, three of the concentrators. So they actually worked on everything and they were wondering why they couldn't get the oxygen purity they were looking for. So they used the right zeolite, like the lithium zeolite, on top of the small sodium zeolite, but still more, it wasn't working. So after like doing a deep in troubleshooting, looking each component, the ones we normally don't look at, they managed to find out that it was actually this one-way valve that was broken. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Tato. Kelvin, please.
So I've worked on a machine that had an issue with filters. So I don't know if that could also be an issue because sometimes they are clogged when now they're getting air from the environment.
Yeah, thank you. So Kelvin, I think you were saying that you've worked on machines where sometimes the filters have been the issue. Tato, do you want to comment or does anyone else want to comment? Or Kelvin, did I misunderstand what you said? Did you want to say something else?
No, that's it. That's it.
Yeah, so like in terms of the intake filter, right? Normally when you're troubleshooting, you want to just try and remove that filter first and then have this concentrator running for just a short time and see if you're going to achieve the oxygen purity. So if you try and run this concentrator without that filter and then you find out that still more, the oxygen purity is not reaching wherever you want it to be, and you have changed everything, serviced the compressor, refilled the zeolite. These one-way valves are the things we need to also consider looking at. I don't know if that has like answered the question itself or the comment.
Yes, I think so. I think it's a good reminder from Kelvin as well, right? Oftentimes we forget that filters, if they're not changed or cleaned as they should be, that can be a reason why we're not seeing the purity that we want, because the airflow is blocked.
Yes.
So Kelvin, very, very good point there to add on. And I think it's also a really important reminder for all technicians that we need to diagnose the device, right? The easy way of repairing something is changing all of the components that we can think of. The harder way is trying to figure out what exactly it is that's actually broken and causing the failure, and just replacing that component. And of course, there's so many situations where we don't have extra components around. So this is a great reminder, Kelvin, from what you said, and Tato, of course, from this question, that it does pay to take an extra minute to look at all of the potential causes of a failure, diagnose the product, and then look at what it could be that is causing our failures. So thank you, everyone, for the interesting discussion. So now our poll question: have you ever thought of a one-way valve affecting oxygen purity when malfunctioning? So I see, this poll has been live for a little bit, so I see that we do have some answers here, and it looks like we've got a lot of yeses. So that's great. It's wonderful that all of our technicians that are here today, all yeses, are always thinking about the other components. Okay, moving on. Now we will take a quick break to do our topic of interest. So our topic of interest today is the different tools that are used when repairing an oxygen concentrator. And Sharon will take us through this. So over to you.
Thank you, Amapri. So today we'll be looking at the tools that we're going to use when repairing oxygen concentrators. So it is important to know the right tool to use when making repairs on an oxygen concentrator. So you might have the right tool, but not know the techniques on how to use it. So today we'll talk about the tools and some techniques that you need to know when fixing an oxygen concentrator. So firstly, we'll start looking at screwdrivers. So these are needed when you want to remove the covers of an oxygen concentrator. So we have the Phillips and the flathead. So you might have different length of this or different sizes. You might have the other ones that are longer, the other ones that are short. But both of them are used to remove covers of the concentrator. So some concentrators have Phillips screws, which require the Phillips screwdriver to remove them, like the J5, Olive, and Jewel, and some other concentrators. So we also have some concentrators that have flat screws, which require you to use the flathead screwdriver. So you need these tools whenever you're removing the covers of a oxygen concentrator. Next, we look at the nut driver or the hose clamp driver. So this tool is frequently used when installing and removing hose clamps on tubing inside the concentrator. So it is important to note that the nut on many hose clamps can be a metric 6 millimeter or quarter inch, which is 6.25 millimeter. So if you try to use a quarter inch nut drive on a 6 millimeter hose clamp, it will slip, preventing you from getting it sufficiently tight. So another alternative is to use a socket on the end of a quarter inch handle, as you can see on the picture. So this is a Devil Brace 525 compressor. So the screws, it's either use a Torx or a flat tip. So it's easier to unscrew the compressor when you use the flat tip, because it's easier to damage the Torx tip if you use that one. So we recommend you use the flat tip, and then you can connect that to the socket and then have the quarter inch handle. Next, we'll talk about the T-spanner. So the T-spanner, this is a 9 millimeter T-spanner. So it's used to remove the bolts that hold compressors in 515 and 525 Devil Brace compressors. So The length of the T-spanner makes it easy for you to access the bots as they are a little bit far and you can't really use a normal spanner. So this makes it easy for you to remove the bots and then be able to remove the compressor from the concentrator. Going on forward, now talk about the multimeter. So an oxygen concentrator requires power to operate. So a multimeter is used to check voltage, either AC or DC, on different points to make sure we're getting the required voltage. And most multimeters have the capability to test resistance, and this is used to test 300 valves if they are functional. And multimeter is also used to troubleshoot different electronic components on the control circuit board, which include like testing for continuity. And also some multimeters have the capability to measure capacitance of a capacitor. So these are really useful when you want to measure the performance of a run capacitor in a concentrator. That is mainly when maybe you're finding problems with which you think might be a result of a faulty capacitor. So this type of multimeters, they help you to measure the capacitance of your capacitor. Next, we'll talk about the red toolbox. So the red toolbox comes with different tips that also help during the concentrator repairs. So these tips include Torx, flat, Phillips, and Allen keys. So this red toolbox comes with a built-in handle, as you can see on the picture, because it commonly requires a lot of force when you're using it. So it's really useful when you even come across a type of screw that you're really not familiar with. If it is new, then you're able to get a tip that suits it, because this red box has everything you need. Different flat tips in different sizes for the Torx, Allen keys, and everything else that you might need. And this is really useful when you're working on a compressor. So aside the box, you need the following tips as consumables, as they can break. So this includes the T27. So the T27, some compressor screws come in different types. So we have the Phillips, the Torx, or Allen keys. So the ones with the Torx setup, like the Thomas models, they use the T27 for the outside screws. So you need a number of these as they easily break. You also need T25. So T25 is used for the inside the compressor. There is a cap retainer that is held tightly using a Torx 25 screw. So we use the T25 to remove the screw. So you also need a number of these as they easily break. So as we explained that, you might have some compressors that have the Allen key, they'll need the Allen keys. So the red box also contains some of the Allen key tips that you can use. So the Allen keys can be used on the compressors, and in some models of concentrators, you have the sieve bed that have the Allen key screws, and even some other concentrators, the pressure regulator. If you want to adjust the pressure, you need some of the Allen keys. So the most used are Allen key number 4, 2, and number 6. Going on, we'll talk about the spanner set. So the spanner set is one of the tools that you need. Though we don't really use all the set, but we have some of the screws that we mainly use. So I'll talk about those. So we have the 15 mm spanner. So this one is commonly used when removing elbow connectors found on the Brace 515 and 525 sieve beds. So it is also used to disconnect the pipe connecting the pipe coming from the four-way valve block and sieve bed in an air sieve model. We also use 17 millimeter. So this one is used to disconnect the pipe between the compressor and four-way valve in an air sieve concentrator. We also use mostly the 11 millimeter. So air sieve beds have 11 millimeter nuts on both ends of the bed, and these require the 11 millimeter spanner. and this allows you to remove them. So when you're opening the sieve bed, when you want to remove the zoorite, we mainly remove one of the bolts, which is at the top. So you need the 11mm spanner. Moving on, we'll talk about pliers. So we have different types of pliers. So we'll talk about 2 of them. So we have the leg grab plier. So the leg grab plier, there might be some moments where you want to repair an oxygen concentrator, but it was already worked on, and the previous person damaged the nuts and they have no grip. So in such kind of situation, you might need a plier to be able to remove such nuts, because the plier gives you a grip on such kind of nuts. And we also talk about the long nose plier. So the long nose plier is really used for when we want to remove zoorite from sieve beds. So the sieve bed, when you open them, they have a filter. So to be able to remove the filter, you need a long nose. So we use this plier to remove the filter, which makes it easy for us to remove the zoorite from the sieve bed. And we use the same when we're refilling the bed, when you're closing the bed. Next, we'll talk about the pressure gauge. So as we know, an oxygen concentrator is required to give out certain pressure at certain points. So for example, the output of the sieve bed have its own pressure reading, and the patient output also has its own pressure recommendation. So this varies in different models of concentrators. So in order to verify all this, you require a pressure gauge. So be sure of the units that are being used on your pressure gauge. And whenever using a pressure gauge, make sure that you know the pressures that you're expecting at whatever point you want to measure your pressure, either be the sieve bed or either be the patient outlet. Next, we'll talk about the soldering equipment. So the soldering equipment, they're useful when removing and replacing a bent component on the control board. They're also needed when connecting wires that are not continuous. So on the soldering equipment, you have the soldering iron. So this can be electric or gas, as you can see on the picture below. So gas can be more convenient, but if you're buying an electric one, try to avoid the cheap ones as they are not temperature controlled. So when soldering, you also need a solder wire, you need a solder sucker, and also heat shrink tubings. So heat shrink tubings come in different sizes. Make sure that whenever you're using this, you have the right tubing, which is recommended for the size of the wires that you're connecting. And then going forward, we'll talk about oxygen analyzers. So an oxygen analyzer is a tool used to verify that the oxygen concentrator is producing the required oxygen purity at different flow rates. So we have some oxygen analyzers that do not have the capability to measure the flow rate, but can only measure the oxygen purity. While the other ones, they can measure both the flow rate and the purity. So we recommend you use the ones that can measure both the flow rate and the purity, as that helps you to know if the flow meter is accurate. Moving forward, we'll look at thread tapes. So this is a tape which is useful in sealing and preventing leaks from connection. So it may be a connection on the sieve bed or connection on the compressor. So these are used on the metal threaded cables or pieces in a concentrator. So when you're using the thread tape, make sure that you're wrapping it in the right direction. So you have to wrap the tape in the direction of the thread. Make sure you wrap it correctly, and this makes it easy for you to connect the threaded pieces together. Going on, we talk about insulation tape. So insulation tape is used to insulate bare wires that might cause shortings. So if you have some bare wires inside the concentrator, that is inside the cabinet of the concentrator, we recommend you solder and then you use the heat shrink, and then you can use the insulation tape. As if you only use the insulation tape, it's easy for the insulation tape to just get worn out. But if you use the heat shrink tubing, it'll be safer that way, because the heat shrink tubing cannot really get on out that easily. Coming this far, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharon, for that overview. I think there was a lot of tools and things that are very necessary for all workshops and technicians to have if you're working on oxygen concentrators, and probably a lot of other medical tools as well. Do we have any other questions or comments or any tools that people use that they find particularly helpful or most important? Okay. And if no one wants to add anything else, we will move on to our next question. So the question is, I am a technician at a certain hospital. I was working on an AirSep intensity compressor. I replaced the old kits with the new ones, but surprisingly, I was getting a weird sound from the compressor. How can I address that? And Aubrey, if you would please answer that question. Aubrey, you are still on mute. Okay, while Aubrey is hopefully sorting out his audio, I see that we have a comment from Seifu about epoxy in the chat. Seifu, did you want to add something? I think that was about the different tools and all that Sharon walked us through. Were you saying that epoxy is a very important tool for you, or did you want to add something about epoxy and how you use it?
Yeah, at some point we have found some leakage and some components, so we have used epoxies. So, and also there is we actually use at some point there is sessions that we have used like the digital caliper. So we usually get calipers with other tools. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Sharon, do you want to add something onto that? That's very interesting, Seifu.
Yeah, I would like to agree with him too. The calipers and the epoxy, yeah, that's some of the things that you also need when working on oxygen concentrators.
Yeah, so Amapri, just to comment on the caliper. So I think a caliper is very useful. Like let's say you open a compressor and then you find a new model of sleeves, right? So you want to take note of the inner diameter and the outside diameter. So I think, yeah, a caliper indeed plays also a big role.
Wonderful. And we heard about epoxy and how important it is, especially if we're trying to repair components earlier. So thanks, Seifu, for bringing both of those tools up for other technicians to be aware of or are already using.
Thank you. There is one little thing to add. Also, the the oxygen analyzer tool is a basic one, since there was some kind of cases that we have found in some clinics in Barda, in Ethiopia. The device will not display the oxygen and also the flow rates. So at that point, we figure out that we just need some kind of device like an oxygen analyzer. Yeah, so that's a very useful device.
Yes, definitely. We are at the Oxygen Alliance huge believers in the necessity and importance of oxygen analyzers. OpenO2 has developed one that anyone can make. And of course, we have talked in the past about the different types of oxygen analyzers that exist. But for sure, essential tools for diagnosing, especially, right? It's important to know what your oxygen purity is, especially with some of the devices that don't have alarms or any indicator of oxygen purity if you don't have an analyzer. So yeah, thank you for adding. Thank you, Seifu. All right, Aubrey, are you maybe back with your technical challenges solved?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. Okay, I will read the question again. I am a technician at a certain hospital. I was working on an air-sup intensity compressor. I replaced the old kits with the new ones, but surprisingly, I was getting a weird sound from the compressor. How can I address that? Aubrey, over to you.
So there are a number of issues to consider when reassembling the compressor. For example, the orientation of the compressor head. So it is advisable to mark the positions of each and every part to avoid misplacement. It is also important to make sure that you set the cups on the cup retainer perfectly. As you can see on the pictures that have been shown, on the right side, it shows the right way, making sure that the cup retainer and the cup fit perfectly. And on the left side, you can see there is some spaces. So these gaps will not make the compressor to be airtight. You might have some leakages. So if the cups are wrongly placed, it is not possible to tighten the cup retainer perfectly. Untightened cup retainers move unnecessarily, which result in the production of the noise that you're experiencing. So if you're unfamiliar with servicing a compressor, or you want to reacquaint yourself with this, you can refer to the video on the compressor overhaul on Oxygen Alliance channel. I think the link will be pasted in the chats. Thank you. Amapri.
Thank you very much, Aubrey, for that explanation. We have our next poll, and during the poll, we will also put the link for the YouTube channel. Our poll question is, have you ever seen a worn out cup? I think this is probably a fairly common challenge, and hopefully one that we see not often, but hopefully it's one that is relatively easy to repair. So hopefully it's something that we are familiar with. And as expected, I think we have all votes for yes. Does anyone have any questions or comments or ideas about the question that Aubrey just shared with us about the worn out cup sleeves? And of course, we do have that video in case you've forgotten how to do the compressor overhaul, and that can be applied to many types of compressors. The overhaul, the concept is the same, just a few tweaks for the different models. Okay, then we will move on to our next question. I am a technician working on a 525 DeVilbiss oxygen concentrator. Despite having a one-way valve before the patient outlet, I found water in the tubing and oxygen sensor. How did this come to happen? And Cynthia, if you would please answer that question.
Thank you. So it is important to understand that one-way valve can be damaged over time as a result of pressure. So too much pressure in the system may cause in the tearing of the internal valve rubber and cause the valve to stop functioning as intended. So since the one-way valve has been torn off with pressure, water from the humidifier bottle will be forced through the tubings and then into the sensor. This can be resolved by replacing the faulty one-way valve with a new one, and make sure that you have the right level of water in the humidifier bottle to avoid the back pressure. And also make sure that the pressure relief valve of the humidifier bottle is working properly and that it has not been sealed off as we have seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Do we have any comments or questions on this? All right. We
Mama,
also
just to comment, I just wanted to point out that I have never personally come across a concentrator that doesn't have a one-way valve of all the models I've worked with. Yeah.
okay. That I think that's good to know. One-way valve sounds like a very important piece that we maybe don't think about as much. And if all concentrators have them, we might want to consider doing a little bit more of a deep dive about them.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so we have a poll question here, and our question is, have you ever come across water in an oxygen concentrator's piping? So we'll give it a minute or two to go over that. And if anyone has any comments on one-way valves, or if you see them, have you seen them breaking often, please feel free to share with us. Okay. So it seems like most people have indeed come across oxygen, water in the pipings. Okay, so for our next question here, I am a biomedical engineer working at a certain mission hospital. I've come across an olive concentrator model YS501. The compressor switches off periodically. I tried opening the compressor up to troubleshoot it. I later thought of replacing the capacitor, which I did, and the compressor behaved the same way. It kept shutting down. Later on, I discovered that the compressor cabinet was made of plastic and there was some heat being produced. Surprisingly, the fan was functioning properly. Then I unscrewed the compressor's cabinet and removed it, exposing the compressor. When I turned on the compressor, it was able to run for more than 30 minutes without shutting down. Then I placed the compressor cabinet back and the problem resurfaced. What can be the problem and how can I fix the concentrator? So it seems like a very complicated situation. Sharon, would you please help us with answering this question?
Thank you, Amapri. Okay, every concentrator has an optimal temperature it works best in. If the temperature exceeds the optimal temperature, then an alarm is raised in some concentrators, or the compressor can shut down in some other concentrators. So compressors get hot as they suck and compress air. That's why fans are installed to keep them cool. They also have thermosensors, which measure the temperature surrounding the compressor. If the temperature is too high, it cuts off power to the compressor, thereby switching the compressor off. If a compressor is shutting down periodically, the first thing that can cause that can be the capacitor. If the capacitor is drained, it fails to keep the compressor running, so you did well in replacing it. But if your compressor was able to run for more than 30 minutes after removing the compressor cabinet, then it is possible that the air inside the compressor cabinet, when closed up, isn't circulating well. So make sure your concentrator is placed away from the wall and away from other materials that can obstruct air ventilation around the concentrator. So if your concentrator behaves the same way after everything else, then it might be possible that the compressor's thermal switch is malfunctioning. The sensor might be sensing the temperature wrongly, thereby switching the compressor off periodically. So we recently uploaded a comprehensive video on the olive 5-oxygen concentrator, which is a different model from the same manufacturer, to our YouTube channel. So for those that will want to familiarize themselves with that oxygen concentrator model, you're welcome to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And Mtedo, I see, has posted in the chat the link to our video about the olive concentrator. So this is a complete breakdown and rebuild, as well as a deeper look at some of the key components. So we have broken this video up in different chapters in case you have a specific problem. Olive is one of those brands that we found that does not have a lot of manuals or service guides or things like that. So we are hopeful that this video helps everyone at the Alliance in actually repairing these concentrators. And anybody who has worked on olive concentrators, we'd love to hear from you, because it is a fairly common product in the market. So we'd love to hear from you, and if you found this video to be helpful, and if you have other comments or questions on the olive concentrators. So thank you very much, Sharon, for answering that question. Does anyone else have any other comments or anything they want to share about the olive concentrators? Okay, then we have our last and final poll question. And that question is, have you ever come across a concentrator which had a compressor that was shutting down periodically? I think oftentimes, at least when I'm thinking about compressors, I think they either work or they don't. So it sounds like as we heard from the question, it sounds like a more complicated repair when that happens. But it seems like most of the technicians here have indeed seen that situation where compressors are periodically turning on and turning off. So I'm glad we were able to answer this question. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of today's concentrator talk. As usual, if you are not receiving the emails or you're not on the calendar invitation, please send us your email in the chat. You can put it in right now, and we'll make sure that you are added to all of the lists and to the calendar invite. If you have any questions, or you're coming across concentrators that you don't know how to repair, or if you see an interesting repair, you see something, you've done it that you think is particularly noteworthy, or a unique repair, and you'd like to share that with us to feature as a question, please do email us. We are always happy to see what you guys are doing in the field and how we can support that. We've got our website that we've got a lot of information on. We are always adding to that. Please send us an email or put in the chat if you come across any different models that you don't have material for, like the olive. We can add it to our list as well. We are, of course, here for everyone in the Alliance to learn and to keep getting better at repairing concentrators. So we've got a few minutes in case anyone has any other questions or comments or wants to share something. Otherwise, thank you very much, and we will see you again next week for the next session of the Concentrator Talk.